Hey guys, it's Sam, and today I'm going to talk about this year's Hugo Award nominees as well as my TBR for reading them. If you're unfamiliar with the Hugos, they are one of the more popular and I would say prestigious, and I say that with air quotes because who really decides that, science fiction and fantasy awards that are held yearly, and they are held at Worldcon, which is one of the big science fiction and fantasy conventions every year. This year it is in China. Last year it was in Chicago, so I went, and I'm hoping to go next year when it's in Glasgow. But the whole thing here and why I started doing this little project was because if you attend, or if you attended in a previous year, then you could like nominate. But if you attend, you get to vote in the Hugos. So the Hugos is sort of it is a popular vote based on who attends the Hugos, has the privilege to attend the Hugos. But also, if you're attending the Hugos, you probably have more of a understanding and stake in science fiction and fantasy to an extent. And so you end up getting this list of like popular sci-fi and fantasy picks for the year. But I do want to talk about the Hugo list this year, in addition, just in general, in a more meta way, because it's kind of mid, in my opinion, and other awards that I might want to look at a little bit more in the future and possibly do a project like this for in the future, because I really like reading the Hugos, because I felt like I was getting introduced to new things potentially, or things maybe I was interested in but wasn't hurrying to read or whatever. This year I don't necessarily feel that way, so I'm kind of thinking about expanding my following of different awards. But anyway, that's different. Let's get into the Hugo nominees and my thoughts on them and my predictions and my TBR of what I still have to read off of the list. So we'll start with novellas, and I have to read all the novellas. By contrast, I have to read like 2 of the novels, which is wild because last year I had to read a ton of novels, and this year I don't because I read most of what's on the list, which I was shocked by. So the first novella nominated is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This is what I've been seeing around, and it's a sapphic love story set in a sort of like there's an espionage element to it. One of the characters is a magical detective. They are in a fantastical Chicago. Another one previously sold her soul to the devil, and both of them still want to spend their lives together, and so they're trying to sort of work out how to do that while taking down like a vampire, essentially. It sounds lovely, honestly, and I think this has won awards already, so high contender on the list, but not something that I was necessarily gonna read like right away, but this will force me to, which is again why I like things like the Hugos. Then we have Into the Riverlands by Nevo. Now I've read other Nevo things, well just one, the like Great Gatsby retelling that they did a while ago. But this novella series is something that people have been loving, and what's interesting about this is you can enter the novella series at any point. Like any of the novellas, this is the 3rd one that's out, but they're all sort of companion-y, I guess. I have the first 2, so I am still planning on reading these in order of how they came out. That's my preference anyway for most books. But it's set in a fantastical world reminiscent of Imperial China, and follows primarily this empress, or sort of like empress-to-be, her handmaiden, and her wanting to like break out of the confines of her arranged marriage and the political situation, whatever, with a ton of fantastical elements. So again, I'm hearing really good things about this in general. I'm going to read it in order. So Into the Riverlands is the one that's nominated, which is the 3rd book. But The Empress of Salt and Fortune was the first one that was published, and When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. I think that's the order, right? So yeah, they're all technically standalones, but I have them and I want to, so that's what I'm gonna do. Then we have A Mirror Mended by Alex E. Harrow. This is the 2nd book in her like fairy tale novella, twisted fairy tale series. The first one was nominated last year, so I read that one, and this is, again, the 2nd in that series, but the first one was about a girl with a chronic illness who finds out that she is sort of like a Sleeping Beauty variant, for lack of a better term. The 2nd book, it's just the continuation of that, where you find out that there are not only Sleeping Beauty variants, but like villain variants. So like Evil Queen, for example. And so like that kind of story continuation. So this is like a combination of, again, sort of dark fairy tale, twisted fairy tale, modern day with parallel worlds, the multiverse kind of stuff that's so popular right now. I don't think this will be my favorite of all of them. I will talk about how I think all of these are going to rank for me at the end. But okay, I've heard people like this one more than the first one, I'm pretty sure, so we'll see. Next is Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is one that I'm like, what? Didn't hear anything about it. I loved, so for context, last year, Adrian Tchaikovsky's Elder Race was the one that I wanted to win for novella last year. I loved it. Between that and Prayer for the Crown, or Song for the Wild Bill, which is what actually won. But I loved Elder Race. This is, I don't know. The synopsis is very unclear. It's a world with ogres, and ogres are in charge, and ogres are a thing, and ogres are landlords, and ogres. Like, literally, that is the synopsis. Go and look at it. So I don't really know what this is about. What I really liked about Elder Race last year was that it was this combination of sci-fi and fantasy, and like it was very cool. This might be a similar thing. I don't really know what he does with these kind of novellas. But this is definitely not one that I would like ever have picked up if it weren't for this. But again, I didn't know about the one last year that I ended up like loving. So who knows? I could be really surprised. But I have no idea what I'm going to get into with this. Then we have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is one that was already on my TBR, so I'm excited to get to this. This is a horror novella, basically a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher, whatever. And it has, I mean, as you can sort of tell by the cover, friends go to see another friend who's apparently like fallen ill, and their house is surrounded by like fungi infested wildlife and just like creepy shit. And can't wait. So they're sort of having to unravel like what is going on here. I think this will be lovely. And then we have Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna Maguire, which is one of the many, I think, what, book 8? I don't even know the list, in this novella series of the Wayward Children series, which is all about children that go through portals and then return. And every other book either follows a kid's sort of origin story, or like what's going on sort of like present day. Sometimes they go into their own like worlds and stuff, but typically it's like all of them sort of together. So this is the One of Them All Together books, but does primarily follow Cora, who's someone we've met in previous books. A lot of shit has happened to her, and she is wanting to transfer schools to the other school that sort of handles this portal fantasy problem that is more strict and basically wants you to forget. So that is where she's trying to go, and then figures out like, oopsie, maybe I should have done this. So the poor girl is probably going to get traumatized even more, but I actually just started this one, and I'm very curious how I'll feel about this, because it's not including some of the, well, at least I don't think, some of the characters that we already sort of know, because she is going to this different location. So while it is in line with the, like, we're going to see some of the repeating characters, it might not so much because she's taking a little bit of a deviation. But we will see how I feel about this one. I typically really love the Wayward Children's books. So I'm thinking, based on just not knowing a lot about a number of these, my contenders of what I think will end up being my favorite, I'm not sure about Where the Drowned Girls Go. I think that's going to be, I don't know, because it is sort of that deviation, but I do really like the Wayward Children series. But I am a little bit like, and I'll talk about this at the end, some authors are so popular in the Hugo landscape that I'm like, guys, pick another author to love. So there's a little bit of that with Shannon, who's nominated for something like literally every year. Even though I Knew the End sounds very intriguing, we love a sapphic tale like that, and it is set in Chicago, where I live, so that could be really fun. But I think the one that's going to end up being my favorite is What Moves the Dead. We have nature corrupting things. I've heard great things about T. Kingfisher. I think this is going to be solid for me. Now we have the novels, of which I've read 4 of the 6 already. So I kind of have an idea a little bit more than I did maybe last year about where things will land. However, I find the novel selection to be incredibly mid. I will talk about that at the end. I liked a number of these books, but none of them that I've read thus far do I think are really like award-winning quality. So I'm a little bit like, yes, I think it can be enjoyable, but like there's probably so many other books out there that I would have thought that the like heavy sci-fi fantasy readership would have known about to nominate, that they didn't. Like, maybe it was just bad selection this year. I don't know. Like, and again, none of these are horrible, but just I'm like a little surprised to see these on the list and other things left off the list. So first is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is a retelling of the Island of Dr. Moreau story, but this is following the daughter of Dr. Moreau in this tale, taking place in Mexico, like near like the Yucatan Peninsula. And this was fine. What I really like about Sylvia Moreno Garcia, what I've read of her so far, is like I really like her themes and what she explores, but sometimes the execution does not like quite live up to my expectations a little bit. Like I want like slightly more. But I also haven't read some of her like most popular books either. I've read Mexican Gothic and I've read this. So of the two, and not that we should be comparing, but of the two, I prefer Mexican Gothic. So this one being on there, like I found this to be much slower. I found the fantasy elements of it to be like, like didn't really care that much. So while it's exciting that Sylvia Moreno Garcia is, I think I've heard that like the first Latinx author to ever be nominated for Hugo, it's sort of one of those like, but for this one? You know, like it's one of those, like, is this almost like a nod in a, you've had so many things and it hasn't made the list, and like, here you go, here's a chance with this thing that isn't even the best thing I don't know. But like, yeah, this is just like a solid 3-star for me. Then we have The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. This I read earlier this year already, and again, enjoyed it. This is following a guy who takes a job with the Kaiju Preservation Society, which is essentially a group of people that go to an alternate dimension of Earth, and there are kaiju, so like Godzilla-y type creatures, and they have to like preserve them, take care of them, make sure they don't break through and cause destruction in our Earth, essentially. Short little thing, nothing of like, I don't know, it was fun. I still do think about it in the way that it was fun. Like, not a ton of substance, let's say. Like, I feel like award-winning stuff, in my opinion, should be doing something sort of new with the genre. Thematically should be really interesting. Like, has a little more just zhuzh to it, right? Like, a little more oomph. And this was just fine. Like, I gave this like a 3.75 to 4 stars. Like, enjoyable. And this has already won some other awards too, which I was like, are the pickings just slim this year? I don't know. But just fine. Then we have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. A fan favorite across the board, right? But another one that I'm just like, award-winning? Like, I don't know. Before any of you get all up in arms in the comments, it's not that I don't think cozy fantasy is something that could win awards. Like, I'm going to get to another one that's kind of deemed cozy fantasy that's on this list as well. It's just that this was just like, again, not anything major. Like, was cute, fluffy. You're building a coffee house, you know. So if you're not familiar with them, which I'm sure you are, this is a story of a adventurer who who is an ogre, loves coffee, and when she's done doing her adventuring shit, she wants to make a coffee shop, and she does in this town. And she has like a little sort of found family, found coworkers, depending on how you want to label it, a little group who help her do that, and it's super cute, and the stakes are super low, and yeah. But it's a lot of just like building and decorating and aesthetics and whatever in a way that I'm like, okay, maybe it's sort of a nod to Travis Baldree being one of the people that really jumped off this genre this year, but it's cute. I give it 4 stars. I don't dislike it. I just want something a little more meat to my award-winning books, you know? So I wouldn't be shocked if this won. This was like so wildly popular, but it is still a bit like a Hugo Award. Anyway. Popular vote, so we'll see. Then we have Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is a series that does have the oomph, does have the zhuzh, does have the extra meat, I think. However, this installment, I'm like, of the 3, this is the installment you nominate. One, I think nominating a book, you know, that's like 3rd in a series is a little wonky anyway. But 2, I think Gideon and Harrow, the first 2 books in the series, were way better than this, even for someone that's been reading the series. This felt like I get it, it's very hella complicated. This is lesbian necromancers in space. It's very complicated. People have whole charts for it. Like, it's a lot. It's a mind grinder. Again, I do think quality-wise, yeah, Hugo Award-winning for sure. And the series itself is nominated for a Hugo as well, which I will maybe mention just the series noms, even though I'm not going to read all of those and opinions about that at the end too. But this is one of those where I'm like, sure. However, this one was just like, they're all confusing. This one was just, felt like such a segue, intentional, but I think Harrow and Gideon had more of that like meat. And maybe people are taking a while to get into the series, and this is the first year people are really recognizing it. I don't know, as far as like the Hugo votership. But this felt like, you didn't nominate Harrow and you nominated this. What? So yeah, this one was fine to me. This one was a 3-star. I think the final book, and that one is kind of like, I hope you nominate that one if that one like knocks it out of the park, because this one I feel like is probably going to be the weakest installment. Personally. The last 2 are books that I haven't read yet, one that I wanted to anyway, so yay. And that is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher really, in both categories this year, that's very fun and amazing. But this is a essentially gothic fairy tale, but cozy, where a main character is trying to help her sister get away from the clutches of like an abusive partner, abusive prince, has to complete a quest from like a grave witch. There are a bunch of people whose paths she like crosses, including a possessed chicken, which I think is very funny. And it sounds great. So at this point, really pulling for the T. Kingfisher and me to love it. But this is a book that I had planned on reading anyway, and now I like have to ASAP for the Hugos, which voting happens in like October. I can't vote because I'm not a attending member this year. but I'm still gonna like read it as if I am voting. And lastly is The Spare Man by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is a like historical fiction-y, like she sets her book sort of in like the 50s, 60s-ish, and this is following a woman, I think who is a detective, but maybe not, who's going on her honeymoon with her husband, going between like the moon and Mars, I believe, and he is suspected, like someone dies, and he's suspected of being the killer, and so she has to solve the murder mystery so that like she can basically get him back. And Mary Robinette Kowal does a little bit of this like sort of funny, retro-y sci-fi, like very popular in the space, but this is one that I like didn't hear anything about. Apparently people who have read it have really mixed opinions. So let me do my sort of predictions for the novels and then talk about this a little bit, this list. I think Kaiju and Legend and Lattes both have pretty good odds, and again, they were books that I enjoyed, but I just don't feel like necessarily are award-winning. I'm really hoping for a Nettle and Bone situation, even though I haven't read it yet. I've heard like nothing but amazing things, and that sounds like something a little bit more intriguing. So kind of voting for a T. Kingfisher sweep a little bit. We will see. Again, none of those I've read, just based on what people have said. So once I do read all of these, I will be doing a video coming back and saying like, here's my lineup, here's what all the my ratings are for everything. I'll do like, I think probably a vlog about it. And here's what I hope wins and all of that. As a final, this is just prediction stuff. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now, not having read everything yet. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier too. I think this list, again, is just mid. I think some of these books were fine, but not award-winning quality, in my opinion. Like, was a little bit surprised by that. And I've noticed now, by following the Hugos a little bit the last couple of years, that Hugo voters have like fan favorites of certain authors that they nominate all the time, which I find to be like a little irritating. So Mary Robinette Kowal is like a fan favorite. She's very brilliant. It works with like actual NASA. Like, yes, cool. However, it's like, really? There wasn't anyone else that you could nominate? Shauna McGuire gets talked about like every single time, like always has a nominee. Granted, she puts out a book like basically every year, but like is always on the list. Another person who is on the YA list, which I'm not reading the YA books, but Charlie Jane Anders only ever shows up in Hugo spaces, from what I've seen, of talking about their books. Like, why? Like, there's just certain fan favorites, and so it's starting to get like a little bland for me, wanting to maybe branch out into other spaces for awards and stuff. I have heard that the Ignite Awards, which is just like a 3-year-old awards right now, has a little bit more variety. I also might look more at the Novellas a little bit. There's usually some Hugo Nebula crossover a little bit, but the Novellas seem to be a little bit different as well. I'm a little more intrigued about like awards that might have a bit of a combined way of voting, like either a popular vote. No, I think my ideal would be judges nominate a short list and then the popular vote votes for the short list kind of thing, or judges all the way. But like, I sort of want a like judge quality to this, and for the award to have like a standard. And some awards don't even say like what they're awarding. Some do say like excellence in science fiction and fantasy, you know, groundbreaking, whatever. Like, so I sort of might be looking a little bit more in the future at awards that have more of that, of like, we have sort of a marker of what we're nominating a little bit, doing something different with a genre. Like, that's what I think out of an award. So I might be paying more attention to the Ignites, possibly the Nebulas. I have looked at like the British Science Fiction and Fantasy Awards, the BSFAs, and the World Science Fiction Fantasy. I don't know, like I've looked at, basically what I did is I looked at a bunch of awards and sort of looked at their previous lists to kind of see like, hey, are these things that I do think are up there in award quality? Are they things I've even heard of? Whatever, and trying to kind of see like which awards might align best with me. But also let me know down below if any of you follow certain awards and you think certain ones like really knock it out of the park all the time. Would love to know. But yeah, even with series, there's some like sort of fan favorites that pop up. Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I want to read that. It also looks like Adrian Tchaikovsky gets nominated for stuff a lot, so seems to be a little bit of a fan favorite. But I have not read this series, but I've heard great things. The Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. I would love if that one. I thought that did some really cool stuff with the blend of science fiction and fantasy that it was. Like, it almost used sci-fi elements as magic, which I thought was very cool. The Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. Again, as a whole series, love that idea of that winning. That is doing some really groundbreaking stuff. I love that. The October Days series by Shauna McGuire. Again, they love their Sean Maguire. Why? That is just like an urban fantasy series. That's probably really great. However, like, really, I don't know. Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich, another urban fantasy series that I don't hear many people talk about anymore. And it's just another, like, urban fantasy is urban fantasy. Again, there can be some groundbreaking within the genre. I read urban fantasy. I love it. But because I read it and know it, I'm kind of like, what is that doing so different? It just feels like, again, fan favorite-y. And then the Scholomance series by Nominee, which I do really love. There's some controversy around that because Nominee, that series keeps getting nominated for the YA award here in the Hugos, which, again, I'm not even really going to talk about besides this. And it's an adult series. And she keeps not turning down the nomination. And people are really annoyed. The second book won last year. So I think that's making people a little sour towards this series, but I think if you take that out of the equation, which is hard to do, but I do really like that series. However, I think Locked Tomb or Founders series are the two that should win because you're doing something extra cool. And maybe Children of Time, because I also haven't read that, but I've heard good things. So yeah, that is my TBR. That is where things stand right now. Those are my potential predictions. Comment down below, let me know your thoughts on the Hugo Awards and just this year's list just being... Or maybe you love this year's list, and that's fine too. And if you plan on reading some of these things and what you think is going to win, let me know all your thoughts Hugo related down below. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.